All right, well, good evening, everybody. It's 6 o'clock. Hope everybody's doing well on this fine and chilly Wednesday evening. Get a good evening. Had a little bit of trouble finding the right Zoom link, but city manager helped me out there. So thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. Let me give everybody a minute. How's everybody's week going? Everybody's muted, so maybe I won't hear any responses, but
well, we're halfway there.
We're halfway there. That's right. That's right.
All productive.
Get any weather, Lexington?
Maybe a sprinkler too. I've not been outside.
Yep. Yep. Good. I think my property manager was telling me some weather was moving through Culpeper tomorrow. So I don't know if that's going to catch you on the edge or catch them on the edge, but be careful, whatever's happening. Well, looks like we got a few people on. Welcome. And do we want to just jump into the PowerPoint, or do the city folks want to do anything in advance, or should we just jump in?
Edwin, I think it's up to you just to move the PowerPoint forward, and
Okay.
We'll support any way we can.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Edwin Gaskin, and I have my partner Randy Cosby on the line. Just started his video, and I thank him for helping me not mess up I was in the wrong Zoom meeting there a few minutes ago. So it was all by myself. It was a wonderful presentation. So we're going to go ahead. I'm with Echelon Resources, and we are a team that is proposing, part of a team with UrbanCore, proposing to purchase and develop the Spotswood parcel. And some of you I know are familiar with this, some of you may not be. I'm going to share my screen and go through a PowerPoint, because that's the tried and true American corporate way to bore people to death. So we'll get through that, and then we'll open the floor to any questions and comments, and just have a nice little dialogue here this Wednesday evening. We want everybody to have all their questions answered. There's no particular format or Robert's Rules of Order. We just want to make sure everybody has their voices heard, and we can try to answer any questions you might have. So without further ado, I will try to share this screen. Okay, so today's February 10th. So if I do nothing else, let's let the record note that I got the date right. So we're talking about the Spotswood parcel, which is, as noted on your screen, highlighted in bright green at 350 Spotswood Drive. This is about a 3.2 acre site, largely vacant land. It does include the former rescue squad building that under our proposal would be demolished. Obviously, well in advance of that, one of our goals is to relocate the vital community tenants that are there, the community table and rah-rah. We are proposing to, once that's demolished, to build a new construction market rate apartment community, 4 or 5 stories high. We're talking about about 150 units. The balance of the site, allowing, of course, for required green space requirements and stormwater and such, would be largely surface parking. And we have a concept that we'll share with you a little bit later. Our goal is really 1 and 2 bedroom units, with really the maximum of 2 bedroom units being 20%. So the vast majority will be 1 bedroom units with a smattering of studio apartments thrown in there, largely due to design constraints. We have offered the city $350,000 for this parcel. So if you're trying to maybe visualize what this might look like, here are renderings of projects that are similar in terms of size and massing, more of an urban look. I wouldn't focus on any detail regarding the facade, because that's infinitely interchangeable, all sorts of options there. But basically you're talking about a 4 or 5 story structure and how it relates to the ground and vehicles and people walking by. So what we do as a team, we are a development team that we like what we do when we get up in the morning. We do a lot of redevelopment, which is both historic redevelopment and what we call infill sites, or sites like this that are part of a well-established area that are vacant and maybe not living up to their highest and best use. We focus a lot on quality housing, because we believe that if folks have a diversity of options to choose from, they're going to choose to live in vibrant communities, and businesses actually thrive off of that, not only to have housing that their customers come from, but also where their employees can hang their hat and be happy living close to their place of work. We are owner developers, and this is a very important point we'll probably talk about a couple of times, and that we see it through beginning to end, and we don't just develop and leave. We're long-term owners in the community. You can see our whole project portfolio at echelonresourcesinc.com. We have partnered with a great team out of Richmond called UrbanCore. They do a lot of ground up new construction, and we felt this was a good pairing of strengths. Won a fair number of awards, over 1 million square feet of new construction. One of the things we really like about UrbanCore is that they're not your average construction firm, and that they're not just focused on 2x4s and the forklifts and such. They really start with the process, with the planning, and having done development now for close to 20 years, I've learned that no matter how awesome we think we are with spreadsheets and capital and all sorts of financial models, our projects really thrive or don't thrive based on what caliber our field superintendents are. So really at the end of the day, it's about the important people in the field, and we as owners and investors, our job is really to get the obstacles out of their way so they can do their amazing work. And I know UrbanCore feels the same way. So, what motivates us as a development team? Developers come in all sorts of shapes and sizes and stripes and philosophies. We really try to focus on reinvigorating neighborhoods. Not that there's anything particularly distressed about this neighborhood, it's doing just fine, but it definitely has an underutilized parcel where it could have a more contributory effect moving forward. Particularly with this site and with other historic sites, we try to find a new relevance for that site moving forward. And financially and economically, you're certainly talking about new taxes, new jobs, new residents, and new revenues for local business. Listen, I'm a big fan of green spaces and places to throw a Frisbee and walk your dog and such. And there's a place for all of those, and certainly that has served this purpose here. But it's not technically a park, and as not being a park, it's not really contributing to the community's tax base as it could. So we focus on creating high quality spaces in such places. Okay, what do we like about the Spotswood site? What we like about the Spotswood site is really wrapped up to what we like about Lexington. And that regionally, it's really hard to find anything comparable to the greatness that is in Lexington. You've got a sense of place. You have a really vibrant identity. It's not too big, it's not too small, has the cultural amenities that people are looking for, the food and the entertainment. That in of itself is a big draw. We've been trying to get some traction in Lexington for a couple of years. This particular site, what we like is that it's walkable to all those things, meaning it can be part of a community and not removed from a community. And we don't like to see auto-dependent developments. We believe in biking and walking and connectivity because we think that not only is physically healthy, but also emotionally healthy for our residents and our development as it's integrated into the community. Even pre-COVID, we really like the idea of live work. You have a lot of professionals that work from home, maybe work remotely. So we try to design our spaces around that working professional, whether their job is, I guess, operationally in California or Kathmandu or downtown Lexington. It doesn't matter as long as we have a high quality space where they can thrive, enjoy it, and be connected. And that's really our marketing push with our clients, is that we focus pretty much on working professionals, some retirees too, and we focus on kind of smaller units that are well designed, but also small enough that allows them to be more affordable. We are not a low-income housing tax credit project. This is a market rate project, but we have found that if you're able to design a really well designed and efficient unit, you can keep the operating prices down, even amidst a new construction model, which tends to be more expensive. So why does housing matter? We believe it matters because every community really needs a spectrum of housing options so people can move up and move laterally throughout their lives and careers to options that they choose. Focusing on the retiree, at some point they're going to want to not mow a lawn. They're going to not have the upkeep of that wonderful house in Lexington. So it's time to transition that to somebody who could enjoy the next phase of their life there, and we will gladly welcome them into a maintenance-free environment. Okay, so let's talk about the investment goal with the site. The site is well positioned, it's underutilized. We don't believe in terms of our business model that the rescue squad building has a lot of relevance. It's obsolete, It's deteriorating, has many limited architectural features. The green space itself also has some limitations, has underground and above ground utility features that really are hemming in what can be done there. So we're talking about a mid-rise project. We were entertaining the idea of doing it in phases, but really our approach now is more of a single phase, as you'll see in the next concept. And our goal here is to be additive to the community, not only to the site in terms of investing capital there and having a viable business model, but being additive in a way that that financial benefit cascades out in terms of positive impact on surrounding property values and also, frankly, the neighborhood psyche. We want to be welcome there as something that's contributing good. This is something you can go back and look at later. These are ground up construction experience notes from our various team members, different apartment communities, mostly centered in the Richmond metropolitan statistical area. You don't need to take notes, all this is available. Here's a site plan I'll come back to. So really what we're talking about right now is a 2-building project that's built at a single phase, where we'd come in off of a entrance, more or less lined up with, I believe that's, I might get this wrong, Taylor across the way, and then pulling the parking towards the back of the site where it will, with some buffer, abut the parking lot that is to the south, slightly east there. So as you can tell, it's a very narrow site. And if you look kind of closely at it, you'll see some red dashed lines. And those are our first attempts to try to navigate the setback requirements that are in sort of the zoning path that we're contemplating. So you can see already that there's already a fair amount of setback and green space built into this very rough draft. And of course, that will be tweaked over time. So don't get too concerned or infatuated with any particular aspect here, because it's got a long way to go before this design would be approved. But this is kind of where we're headed. As you know, this is a community outreach meeting. This is meeting 2 of 3. And we are here to answer any questions. And we're doing these outreach meetings really to get an idea as to sort of the concerns and ideas from the community. Before we ever really have or are asking city council for any sort of action, we want to make sure we get this kind of feedback so we get an idea of where we're headed and what issues the community would like us to address in this journey. So that being said, I am going to try to stop sharing my screen and bring everybody back up. We got to have a few more people that have joined. Again, my name is Edwin Gaskin, and I'm going to try to stop talking now and would love to answer any questions. If you want to ask a question, please unmute yourself.
Edwin, in your projects where you develop apartments, do you hold any back that are rented via Airbnb that would have multiple tenants throughout a month or something like that?
That's a great question, Mr. Stigler. We, to date in our portfolio, we have not pursued any sort of short-term rental strategy like that. Frankly, I know real estate articles, particularly in the last couple of years, have been a bit enamored with that. But we have found, generally speaking, short-term rentals to be an administrative hassle. We are not hoteliers. We're not in the hospitality business. We're in the apartment business. We even struggle with sometimes very valid reasons to have a short-term lease. Sometimes, particularly where we have apartment communities near a hospital, we'll inevitably get questions, a request for leases for traveling nurses, which are typically like 3 months or so. We used to be very, arm's length with that and sort of stiff arming that because that's not our preference. We loosened up a little bit in the times of COVID because of trying to support our hospital neighbors. But we are very reluctant to lease at less than that. Now, that being said, Lexington is an amazing community that a lot of people want to come see. Could that be a possibility here? We're open to that discussion, but that is not our financial objective. We think that creates a challenge to our capital strategy. When we approach both investors and potential lenders, they're going to want to know where the money comes from. And they're going to be much more comfortable with the idea of a rental community, your normal 12-month leases, maybe some 6 months, and maybe the odd 3-month in there. I would see them having much greater concern about dedicating a portion of our income model to an Airbnb type of product. I hope that answered that. I wasn't very well scripted because I didn't know that question was coming. So that's
no. I don't like to let anyone know what questions are coming. Can I ask one more question for the time? And if I don't mind, if you don't mind, to ask Mr. Cosby because you're from UrbanCore, that's correct? Or are you with Echelon?
No, I'm with Echelon also.
Okay. Well, if I would love to ask a question, and I'm going to fast forward as if this was occurring because this is a question that I've already heard in the community. It's next to a cemetery, just across the street, and I've heard concerns that construction is something that could last 12 to 24 months, much longer maybe. And does your company have experience in respecting what might be occurring in a cemetery if there's a service on a certain day at a certain time to suspend operations? Now, again, I know I'm jumping way into the future, but this is something that has come to me to say, wow, I can't believe we would maybe have to have a service while they're hammering and so on. So I'm going to throw that at you. If you can even attempt to answer it, I'd love to hear.
Sure. Well, I suspect Edwin and the UrbanCore folks would have a similar answer. But as far as the general timeline goes, this should not be a problem to complete from start to finish within 12 months. We would definitely hope to stay under that for this size project, which we're talking about somewhere in the ballpark of 150 units right now. In terms of I guess hitting the pause button, I think that's just a matter of coordination and how frequently it happens. But I mean, it's not uncommon for us to have to coordinate with a neighbor, and that's stuff we have to do, whether we're doing an adaptive reuse project or a new construction project. So that's something that we're comfortable with, so long as it doesn't, become a Monday through Friday 9 to 5 blockage. But I think it's more of a matter of just proactive coordination than anything, because without that, we've got no way of knowing what's coming up. But we certainly want to be respectful, and I suspect we should be able to work around that.
Yeah, I appreciate the answer. Thank you. It's hard to know that type of thing, but it's a valuable resource, and cemeteries are obviously sacred ground to folks when there's a service. So appreciate the answer. Thank you.
And just to piggyback on that, I mean, I think generally, events of solemnity need to be respected. And with some, just minimal coordination, I'm sure we can coordinate that. But it goes beyond the cemetery use. There'll be living neighbors as well that might have needs as well. I'm thinking of a few years ago, the project we did in Chatham. Unbeknownst to us, the very patient neighbor is a concert pianist, and she would occasionally record. And while we were under construction, we had some pretty heavy site work to do to get a sewer line out to the street. And when they were digging this 20-foot trench, it was anything but quiet. And they would drop this bucket and everything would shake. And I wasn't on site that day, but she found my number and reached out to me. And basically, we worked out a way to be more courteous of her schedule. Thankfully, it was a short-term task, but we became good friends and coordinated. There was a tree that fell over later that we had to coordinate getting sliced up and off the property. Again, the whole point is to be neighbors, and we are owner developers for the long term. There is nothing about construction that's quiet, neat, or tranquil. we will manage that chaos from start to finish, but at some point we're going to open. And when we open, we're going to not only eat our own cooking, so to speak, in terms of the product we've developed, but also the relationships we've engendered. Not only, with the community leadership and folks on this call, but people living next door. So we have every motivation in the world beyond just waking up trying to be nice people to make an investment in those things as well. Hi, Debbie.
Hi. So this is all very interesting to me, and I have a sort of a series of just questions, thoughts. I grew in my young adult life, lived in a wonderful conversion, factory to condo, very small footprint, and it worked okay. It was a dense urban environment, so a little bit different than this. So a couple of questions I have, and I'm sure some of them have been considered and answered, but one is just, is there enough? You wouldn't do this if you didn't think there was a demand, but I know that a lot of rental property has been released in Lexington by drawing students back onto campus. So I wouldn't want something to draw away income stream from existing homeowners who struggled maybe to keep up those homes that have rental units in them. Another one is, if it is upscale, drawing in professionals and retirees, the question of how many bedrooms is an important one, especially in post-COVID, where so many people are squeezed right now for office space or separate space, Zoom space, that kind of thing. So what might have been fine before, as a 1-bedroom, if people are working at home, I think we're transitioning office space back to people's home spaces. And so that's just a question. I know it's cost, the rental would go up, but it's just a question about current demand. I'm interested in the view shed from the cemetery. It has been open. David's talking about sacred space, and I just would want to make sure that it was pleasant to look at from that important space in the center of our city. And another one is just, I know a lot of Lexington is not very well organized from a city design point of view, in that you've got, we got some places, say off of Nelson Street, where you can get into a parking lot, but you can't make your way over to the neighboring parking lot. So I'm looking at that spot and wondering if there's going to be a pedestrian access, maybe through it up to the hospital or to those office buildings. Will it kind of open itself up to pedestrian movement, because that's what we're looking at, walkability. So those are just random thoughts, questions.
Well, Debbie, I count about 5 questions. I'm going to try to remember them all and address them all. And if I don't, let's circle back and make sure I get them. Okay. So as I heard it, starting with 1, does this demand exist for this kind of rental product? I guess we won't entirely know until the lights are on and we're done and we have the now leasing signed up, but everything we're reading thus far indicates that there is a demand for this kind of unit. As we said in our last community call, we're not student housing developers. And you make a good point about the universities bringing students back on campus, and that essentially freeing up some of the rental stock, and particularly rental homes. We don't think we'll compete head to head with that. I think tangentially we will. I think you're absolutely correct. But the product we're designing, if you're in the market for a rental home, you're probably not our customer. And if you're, the reverse is true. If you're looking for a maintenance-free, smaller but well-designed condo, we're probably not threatened by somebody that's looking to lease a 3 or 4 bedroom house with a yard. So just a question of figuring out who your customers are. And we think the studies that we've read indicate that there's a demand for this kind of thing. In terms of how many bedrooms, and this is sort of relates to the next question about adjustments for COVID. Even before COVID, we've been programming into our communities, for lack of a better word, breakout space, not only a business center, but also micro offices. Because we found in some of our other communities that we designed and developed well before COVID is that if you're catering to working professionals and they've got a noisy dog or even a small child, sometimes you can't do that business meeting. You can't do that Zoom thing. So it's good to have breakout space. So particularly the project that we did in South Boston, which you can see my virtual background is behind me. It shows it under construction. We actually dedicated a very large area where we have, I get the count wrong, but 9 or 10 smallish offices. They're only about 7 by 10, but it's enough room for an internet connection and a desk. And occasionally some of the executives and working professionals we have staying with us essentially use those on a one-off basis for free, or if they want a more stable workplace environment, they can lease them on a monthly basis. Basically, we've built that in. Randy and I are working on finishing a project in Suffolk right now that we were designing just as COVID was hitting. And we decided to double down on that and really invest more in that COVID-friendly breakout space where, actually that was a terrible pairing of terms. How about we say COVID reactive business center or office-friendly space where somebody living and working from the community could walk down a hallway and go to a internet-friendly office environment and do that video call and not appear like they're working from home. So we've tried to make those adjustments, and goodness knows we have the whole rental property industry has more adjustments to make with all this to the new normal, but we're trying. In terms of the last two questions about view shed being pleasant to look at and city design, those are all interrelated. Again, the facade of the building is something that can be adjusted almost an infinite number of ways. And I'm sure we will be influenced in an infinite number of ways by the city processes that we will have to go through to get there in terms of materials and the look. There's not much we can do about the massing, the idea of a 4 or 5 story building. You're going to see that. There's just no way not to see that. But in terms of what those materials are that you're looking at, I think there are some adjustments. Now, in terms of your last question, Debbie, about sort of design and integrating to around us, I got to give take my hat off to the city staff on this. As we were introducing our purchase contract to them, which has been introduced to City Council for consideration, their immediate reaction was actually helping us set, for lack of a better term, project expectations. And I believe first or second on the list was exactly that, the idea of connectivity. Now, if we're talking about getting vehicles from one parking lot to another or out one road, that's a challenge because you'd have to have the consent of the adjacent property owner, which sometimes for very good reasons of their own, they don't have to consent to. So our goal with the city is to work out really those pedestrian connection points and particularly cycling connection points. You guys have trails and streets and sidewalks, and we're not building a moat and bringing up the drawbridge. We're doing just the opposite. We're trying to integrate this into a connected community. So we actually think that's one of our bigger selling points. One of the most excellent project launches we had was in Culpeper, where we redeveloped a less than beautiful power plant building. And it was sort of on the edge of the downtown area. And kudos to the town leadership. They decided on their own to build a bridge with some grant money to connect the street that ran by our property across this bold creek to their trail system. And we were about 2 or 3 months from opening. We were still heavy under construction. They built this bridge, and immediately the day after they opened it, people from the park and trail system started walking through that neighborhood. And I knew as soon as I saw those people speed walking by or walking their dogs, I knew we would have zero problem leasing that just because people like to be connected to things. And we were at least a month before we opened, and I would attribute a large portion of that success to the fact that you could literally come home from work, park your car, go walk your dog. You could take a mile plus route back down to the park and back. And that really just transformed the project. And it's that kind of city design coordination where we can be plugged into the great success that you have going that really makes this sort of a good to great, transition. Did I get your list? Was there anything else on the list I needed to touch?
I appreciate that. Thank you. I didn't mean to pile it on.
No, those are all good questions. If you have any more, just don't be shy. Ms. Jarvis, I'm pretty sure you have a list for me this evening.
I don't have a list. I did a lot of talking the first time. And it was funny, my son, he had to watch it with me when we got back. So I don't have Facebook, but we're able to see it on the city site. Looking at the concept that you have and kind of going along with what Debbie was saying, I'm on that part of Taylor Street. So when I come out and look, all I'm going to see is this big giant building. So is there room to switch the way it's laid out on the property?
What the concept, the short answer is absolutely. The longer answer is what we put out there is just a rough draft, because I'm a very visual person. I love spreadsheets and all that, but really at the end of the day, coming to these meetings, we wanted to show even what we couldn't show city council when we introduced the purchase concept. So really between that meeting and the first community meeting, we rushed to develop a concept we thought that might be relevant. So there's no doubt about it, it's going to be visible. That kind of massing is a part of the project. Moving that back to the other side of the site might help, but then you'll see more of the parking. The challenge is that you have a 3.2 acre site. It's not very big. And so the question is, how do we, I can't make it not be what it is. So either we're gonna like it and or tolerate it, or we're not. It's almost a pass fail. We can move some pieces around, but none of it, is going to hide the fact of what it is.
And then I had a couple different questions. So the two separate buildings, but they're still just going to be apartment units?
Correct. In fact, I'm just noticing now that some folks are typing some questions into the chat box, and I apologize. I'm not a Zoom expert, so I just clicked on that, and it looks like Greg on Facebook had just asked whether or not they're all going to be rentals or condos, which sort of ties to your question, Ms. Jarvis. We right now have a rental model that we're going forward with it in terms of financing to be a market rate rental community. Long term, there could be opportunities for condominiumization or ownership of the units, but right now that is not what we are pitching, so to speak.
And the last meeting that you had, and you talked again here about like eating your own cooking. So how do you envision this when it's done? And you guys, is somebody going to be on site as like a landlord or
Property manager?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you asked a great question. So really when you get above about 75 units, that is sort of the threshold for full-time property management. Anything under that, you're really looking more of a part-time model. So yeah, definitely at 150 units, you're talking about a full-time staff person or two that's really actively involved in managing the community. You may be outsourcing some of the service or maintenance or cleaning functions, and certainly lawn care and things like that. But in terms of a person or two that's the face of the property locally and managing it as a full-time job, that is a very fair expectation and frankly, a requirement of how we would approach this. Randy and I and the other partners will be in the background, but thankfully we won't be the local property management face. We'll leave that to the professionals. And it could be a matter of teaming with a local property management firm or us building a team there that's accustomed to this community.
And then I had another question at the last meeting, and I think it was David said that right now that RARA and the community table do rent that from the city, and they're not in the, I can't think what you said, not very good at renting stuff, and that's not the line of work the city should be in. Have you thought about, and I think they were also talking, the building is obsolete. Have you thought about seeing what RARA would need and what the community table because in the paper today, they did talk about that is where we vote in the area. But have you thought about maybe having the ground floor be something that Rara could still use and the community table, and then rent that from you instead of the city, but give it a more vibrant, upbeat, new life, but still provide a service? Because I know also the we have the coffee house that goes there, and it's like a little dance party that they would do once a month. So I'm just wondering what's going to happen to those kind of things as well. And then have maybe apartments up above it. And I'm just trying to make the best out of a terrible situation
Sure. And it
on
sounds,
my, and no offense again.
none taken. And it sounds like some of that might be directed to me, some of that might be directed to the city, but I'll field some of it and let the city jump in as they would. A couple of challenges with your very well-intentioned thought. So when we put residential above and commercial below, now we've exploded the parking requirement, because commercial space requires much more parking per zoning than residential does. And if you think about a strip mall or retail center,
Right.
it's just, a sea of parking. And there's a good reason for that, because the city planners or any municipal planners don't exactly know who's going to lease there. And so they sort of double down on that parking of what might be there. So that's one challenge. It simply wouldn't fit on the site. Financially is another challenge. Right now, Rara and Community Table lease that space. I don't know what they lease it for. I doubt it's a dire amount. It is an older building that the city's been very generous with. When we build this building, it's an expensive build. There's no way around it. There's underground utilities to move. There's parking to develop. There's site work. There's vertical construction. And at the end of the day, the project needs to be successful, or else long-term, that's the biggest risk, that it becomes a negative stain on the community if it fails. So all that debt that's incurred has to be serviced, and it's got to be serviced through rental income. So that's the cruel math, that at the end of the day, if we did have office space, if that were somehow allowed through a mixed use approach, and somehow the parking could magically fit, it would not be cheap office space. And I'm just being transparent and candid, like I always try to be, always courteous, but I don't think that's really going to be the optimal financial meeting point with Rara and Community Table. They have a great deal, a great scenario there, and it will be disruptive should this move forward. But we've committed to work with them and with the city to try to help transition them. And hopefully, this inconvenience and this disruption can launch a new chapter for them as well. Hopefully they can find a situation with everybody facilitated and everybody trying hard to help them, that sort of sets the tone for the next several years for them. Maybe it's a better location, maybe it's a better spot. I don't know. It's hard to see into the future that far. I wish I had all the answers, but I don't. And in part, that creates the opportunity for Team Lexington, all of us together, to help rally and support these vital nonprofits to help them land well, so that they're well positioned going forward. Ms. Jarvis, I wish I had all those answers, but I don't. I am committed to being part of the larger team to help work with them to find the solution. One of the things that we are doing is we did commit to, should City Council see it in their best interest to vote this purchase contract forward, then we're going to, we've already committed to give at least a year before they would have to relocate in any way. So not only do we have the time right now of this community discussion and contemplation with the city, and should the City Council, move to approve, then we have at least another year past that. So it's a bit of a runway to help engender good decisions.
Ms. Jarvis, I think Mr. Gaskin made a couple of good points. I'm working with the RARA folks now, John Elistad, who's on their board, and Jen Handy. And one of the very unique needs they have, and they've expressed, and it's hard to solve, you scratch your head, is that when they have the food available in their pantry, they said everyone shows up at 7 in the morning. So they need 45 parking spaces at 7 in the morning. And the rest of the day, they need about 5. Because, when people come for the food, they want to shop and see what's there, get the very best. So there's some very unique challenges with the services that RARA provides. So it would be, as Mr. Gaskin said, very difficult, frankly, probably impossible for them to be on the site with a residential community such as he's proposed. But we are in the community looking at new sites for both RARA and the community table. Again, we were at a meeting yesterday with leaders of both Rockbridge County, City of Lexington, and City of Buena Vista, looking at some of the needs we have for RARA and some other community resources. And so it's being discussed actively, and they're looking on their own as well.
And that would go for the voting as well?
Voting would probably be in a new location. I met with the electoral board this morning. They're looking at several sites already. Of course, they'd like to work with the city and make sure that we're supportive and can assist in some fashion. And of course we would, because that's one of our obligations, to make sure that we have an adequate site for voting and for the public to come and vote in an organized fashion.
Just directly, some questions are being chatted to us. So just to read some of them, somebody wanted to know at our initial city council presentation, we did talk about the possibility of phasing both buildings. We've shifted to really talk about a single phase, and the reason for that is really we got the professional design team involved, particularly engineers, and they looked at this 3.2 acre site, and they came back and presented the challenges that of opening a building and its related parking, and then trying to do a subsequent project on the same site would be virtually impossible without, immediately enraging all the people you just convinced to lease there. There are very integrated utility solutions that need to be worked out on that 3.2 acres, very integrated stormwater solutions. Somebody brought up a lot of stormwater questions last time, very relevant. All that really needs to be done over the whole site at once. So that's why we've moved towards a single phase rather than try to do it in two phases. I hope that addresses that question. Another question that was chatted was talking about, I don't even know that's a verb, can I say chatted? But that's what's happening. So somebody talked about parking, and we talked about a little bit this last time. Parking is the great limiting factor on this site. So because we're talking about majority studio and one bedrooms, we really are treating this more like an urban product, and we are going to be comfortable, like we are in some of our other communities, of really a one space per unit ratio, which seems very tight to some that may be coming from a more of a suburban apartment complex or more of a retail kind of complex. But in the communities that we've parked our tenants in the past, you really see a range between 0.7 spaces per unit to 1.2 per unit. And it is tight. Sometimes you have to work with parking permits and assigned parking, but it works. Again, we have a real constraint on this site in terms of how do we fit everything in it and keep the green space and the setbacks that are required. And that's one of the ways we get there, so to speak. Another question I'm not sure I understand completely. I think it came via Facebook comments, but I think it's about the process we followed to submit a proposal, because this is city-owned land. And I think the question, if I understand it correctly, was whether or not the city would be accepting bids from other companies. We have submitted what's known as an unsolicited proposal, meaning the city didn't put out an RFP. They didn't ask us to submit anything. We did our research and came to the city and said, here you go, here's a proposal. And the city at this point has, an unlimited amount of options. They could ignore us, they could reject us, they could negotiate with us, they can accept us as we submitted, which, one can only dream. But really, it's really in the city's court to decide what they want to do next. They own the land, they can continue to own the land, they can tell us to take a hike, they could tell us that more politely, or they could negotiate with us to a compromised outcome here. So, or they could put a stop to the entire process, and if they wanted to follow a more formal procurement path, then issue an RFP. We have done successful projects, purchasing municipal sites, all those different ways. This is just a path we followed. It is worth noting that this piece of land has sat there for a long time in city ownership. And I know the city has received proposals in the past for it, but there is literally nothing stopping anybody from submitting a proposal, just as we did for city council to consider, just like they're considering ours. I hope that addresses that question. And Janie, thank you for your efforts to try to get these comments into the discussion. Debbie.
I have just an observation. It's not a question really, but you know, if this goes forward, I know there's a lot of concern about the aesthetics. You know, as Ms. Jarvis says, you know, how is it going to look? And you know, my experience, and I'm not an architect or a visual person, but you know, I lived in a beautiful brick factory with huge windows, and I love those brick walls. I love those big windows, but it fit into its neighborhood. I saw examples where newly built structures went into those neighborhoods and tried to mimic the brick, but they were too massive, and so they were hulking and huge, whereas some glass mirrored, you know, modern looking buildings actually had less negative visual impact. So, you know, in that site, I would encourage people not to demand that it be the brick and columns traditional to Lexington, but, you know, it could more disappear if it was a modern, like the hospital has a piece of it that's brick and open. And I think the new Rockbridge Health Center is also more of a modern and brick. I mean, not modern glass, mirrored glass. So that's all. It's just, you know, just to say that I don't think we have to demand or require traditional materials for this site.
Debbie, I appreciate those thoughts. I will happily defer issues of subjective design and aesthetics to the architects and the design professionals. I will note, and I think this maybe captures one of the important points you've made, is that when we do historic rehabilitation tax credit projects, they're overseen by the Virginia Department of Historic Resources and the National Park Service. And one of the interesting things is that sometimes, in rare instances, you have to build an addition onto a building or some sort of accessory structure. And you would think that they would want you to mimic the history or try to integrate it. In fact, just the opposite of true. They don't want you to do that. They want you to distinguish it so it is not fake history. It is not trying to mimic something from a prior era. And there's no limit to opinions on how things should look like, but it is interesting when I go through redeveloped neighborhoods around the country and even around the world, you see what can be sometimes jarring initially, historic and modern, and then you just sort of like it. I've been very fortunate to travel and see lots of different places, and I really like seeing how a diversity can be created that's visually interesting and speaks to the different chapters in the community history. You know, too often, this is an oversimplification. You know, we in Virginia sometimes only think of the Williamsburg era as our history, when in fact there's so many amazing parts and chapters to it, and there's interesting architecture from all of those chapters. And particularly working in the historic tax credit programs that we do, it's interesting to see things that are being renovated now that are from the 60s and the 70s. And, you know, I'm from that era, and so I don't consider myself that historic. So it's interesting to see architecture from that era now being classified as worthwhile for restoration and redevelopment. So again, we'll have a professional team addressing those challenges and trying to make everybody happy in that futile task of checking all the design boxes. Don't see any new questions in the chat stream.
I'm Arthur Bochenstein. I'm as a landscape architect, I might point out that for buildings of this scale and parking areas of the size that are necessary. The topography on the site is fairly significant and represents a challenge. And that sort of relates to the idea of the character and style of the building. It might be able to, there might be more possibility of addressing those sorts of challenges with a more contemporary aesthetic than something that's more traditional. But I think it is so critical that when you look at this site, I think it is important to, you know, take that into account. And it may be that your planners have already studied this, but there's like from Spotswood, from west to east, there's about 10 feet of grade change from one side of the building to the other, and then north to south from Spotswood back to the medical parking. There's, you know, as much as 20 feet of grade change there. And of course, the parking has to be relatively level, as do the buildings, unless the buildings step. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Arthur, we would have saved a lot of headache had we talked to you first before we even talked to City Council, because you actually just encapsulated perfectly what changed from that first City Council discussion to that first community meeting, where we decided to back off the two-phase approach and went to single phase, because it principally came back to what you just talked about, sort of balancing out the site. Because of the topo going east to west, there needs to be effectively a rebalancing to get to, you know, essentially a level playing field, for lack of a better word, for both the parking and the buildings. So we didn't think we could accomplish that off of two separate phases after a couple of engineers looked at it and made fun of our concept and told us that there had to be some engineering involved to rebalance the site. So thank you, Arthur. That's
but it's more than just rebalancing the site, because there is even rebalance. There's going to be some fall from west to east and from south to north.
absolutely. And again,
it's an
just like these questions about design on that, topography and stormwater, we're going to happily bring on a very technical team to address those.
Yeah, I mean, you can use that to your advantage, you know, to break up the scale of the building and make it a more interesting, beautiful building. It's not necessarily a negative. It's just, it ought to be taken into account. You don't want your units to be facing retaining walls just to make it level.
Agreed.
Of course.
Agreed. Thank you. That's a great perspective. And it's an interesting site, and it's even made more interesting because it is small. You don't really have a lot of room for error of any kind. It's got to be precisely designed to address both the engineering and the aesthetics, and that takes a good team.
Thank you.
Thank you. Got another question in the chat box. Utilities, stormwater runoff, noise pollution, air pollution, we want all these addressed. Not to be flip about it, but so do we. Absolutely. Thankfully, I think you've hit on all the highly regulated topics, the person that posed those questions. And so even once we get through the rezoning aspect, which will address more of the municipal ordinance restraints and the aesthetics that we've talked about, then a whole new chapter begins of the engineering side. So the site plan will address issues of stormwater. Of course, everything regarding air pollution and such is already addressed in terms of the DEQ and EPA laws that are in effect now. Utilities, we've already started a discussion in a preliminary manner with the city regarding the relocation of the current ones and how do we both benefit from it. And, you know, anytime there's an addition of a building into a utility system, there's an opportunity to add a customer to that system, a long-term customer for life, but also a way to, you know, in a small area, upgrade the infrastructure so that that particular section of Lexington's utility system, which is, as old as Lexington in some places, can be improved. So again, I don't have the answers to all those topics, but those are all topics that are in the project's critical path that have to go through a highly managed design process with the right professionals at the local and the state level before it's approved. Hope nobody's feeling shy. Definitely want to get all the questions out there, but this is not a test. There's not a time limit. We do have a community meeting, so another one coming up tomorrow night, actually. I think it's at 8, right? And we tried to space these out so people with different schedules can fit their time. I may be in my pajamas tomorrow because that's a lot closer to my bedtime. So, but maybe Randy will feel that one. He's more of a night owl. But anyway, so there's no time limit to what we can spend tonight. Of course, we don't want to waste anybody's time. But we can pick this back up tomorrow. But I'm here for the duration. So does anybody have any other questions they want to voice or comments or ideas? Arthur was very helpful with some of his ideas. We'd love to hear that times 10. Well, if is none. I'm not a big fan of awkward silences because I've had 3 teenagers at the same time, so I know what that's all about. I'm happy to give it a few more minutes, but somebody chat in some questions or raise your hand and let us see your smiling face, and we'll address any questions you might have.
I have one more. Let me get my video back on. One more thought, and this is getting too detailed, but since there seems to be some available time, I'll mention it. That you have a sort of a common area, recreational pool that's at that corner of the building, and I was just wondering whether you would think in terms of rental apartments directly adjacent to that, or whether those spaces might be, become some sort of common space that would be an amenity for the residents.
Can you repeat your question, Arthur? Not sure I quite understand.
Yeah, well, just the question is whether you're taking that into account, that that your pool area might be a little bit on the noisy and public side, and yet you have private. You don't necessarily want to have private residences directly facing it, right, directly adjacent. And so it's just a question as to whether there might be some other spaces in the building that would be more just for recreational use, that would be common spaces to the residents.
Arthur, you not only bring up a good point, but you've actually exposed a exposed nerve of contention between us partners of whether or not that pool makes sense, period, or whether or not that pool makes sense there. So again, you've been just like precision point on in terms of identifying why this concept is a very rough draft. It's there. Does a pool make sense in this community? We don't know yet. That really depends on the market data from potential tenants, from the number of units. Frankly, does it make sense in a place with such a small site where we're struggling with parking already? Is that a better community garden? Is that more congregational space? All these questions are good ones and concepts. They sort of compete for attention. None of us are really married to the idea of a pool or a pool there. It just happened to be what the architect dropped on the plan when we were rushing them to issue a concept. So far from being done.
Yeah.
Certainly that's an active point of discussion. You know, we probably, you know, we're definitely going to have an amenity package inside the building. I agree that there's, you know, more of a risk of noise, both for our residents, but also adjacent neighbors if they're an exterior pool facility. So that's in our very long list of things to vet out.
Right. Yeah.
A very astute observation.
Yeah. Good answer. I recognize I'm ahead of the game here.
Yeah. And that concept is, we've already sketched all over it even since the last community meeting. So we're really waiting to get you know, both feedback from this and, you know, our next couple of conversations with about, you know, doing another tweak to that. So very helpful feedback. Question about addressing the possibility spillover of parking impact on adjacent property owners and streets. That is a very good one and a very good question. And no real simple answer. I think the overall question is the facility properly parked? And that's a question we're going to be debating not only during the zoning process, but also during construction and thereafter is the facility properly parked? Because the challenge is doing it precisely. And to do it precisely is more than just, you know, assigning a ratio to a unit. It's really knowing our customers and knowing their habits and what they're doing and what they're planning to do. So the easy approach, sort of a facile answer, would be, let's just apply, you know, the one size fits all city ordinance metric and be done with it. Well, in that case, and for very prudent reasons, most municipal parking ratios are oversized. They're overly conservative in terms of number of spaces per unit. And as we talked about, particularly in the retail sector and even in the residential sector, that results in, you know, very large parking areas, very large impervious areas, which of course leads to stormwater issues, pollution runoff, etc. So the challenge is not creating a whole bunch of parking. The challenge is creating the right amount of parking. Again, that's a very good question that we don't have the precise answer to, nor do we have a guarantee for it. You know, there's that old saying in retail, you don't build for Christmas. You don't size your facility for the holiday rush. Well, inevitably, there's going to be some circumstances where in this facility or almost any other, things would spill over onto the neighboring streets. Mr. Hallis was talking about how, you know, there's essentially a time-specific rush for the food pantry. You know, there's a compressed moment where they need a lot of parking, and then most moments when they don't need very much. Apartment communities are more normalized in their demands, and that's why, statistically speaking, they have some of the least traffic impact generation burdens of other potential uses, because they are fairly normalized and predictable. So I think we're going to have a lot of dialogue about the parking issue, largely constrained by the sites, that's sometimes going to spill over into, you know, on-street parking or the neighboring areas. But our hope and intention is for that to be event-driven, not part of normal operations. Randy must be boring people because we're dropping participants off. So good job, Randy. Any lingering questions or ideas? I think the Facebook commentary has been terminated for the evening. They've gone on to other things maybe. So if there's nothing else, I would encourage you to, return tomorrow evening, and we'll talk about this again. We appreciate everybody's time. We think it's this kind of community discussion that allows us to sharpen our pencils and refine really the priority list as we develop this design with this kind of input. So thank you everybody for the time. Have a good evening.